Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into a world you thought you knew, but maybe, just maybe, you've got it all wrong. Picture this, the salty spray of the North Sea on your face, the rhythmic creak of timbers, and the glint of a polished axe at your side. You're a Viking, right? A fearsome warrior, a plunderer of monasteries, a legend in the making. Well, tonight we're swapping that image for something a little more pragmatic. You see, while sagas sing of battles and glory, for every berserker charging into the fray, there were probably a dozen folks like you, quietly trying to make a living. You probably won't survive the boredom, let alone the journey. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, not to the clang of steel or the roar of a dragon-headed longship, but to the familiar, earthy smell of the cowshed. The sun, a pale disk over the distant hills, casts long shadows across the frost-kissed fields. This is your reality. No horned helmet here, just a practical wool cap pulled low against the chill. Your hands, calloused, not from a sword hilt, but from gripping a plow and mending fences, already ache from the morning's chores. This isn't the epic saga you've heard whispers of around the fire. This is Tuesday, and the sheep aren't going to herd themselves. You're a young man, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, and your future, as far as you can tell, involves a lot more mud than gold. Your family, like most in this scattered settlement, is a self-sufficient unit. Your father, a man of quiet strength and even quieter humor, teaches you the rhythms of the land, when to plant, when to harvest, how to tell if a cow is truly sick or just putting on an act. Turns out, it's usually an act, just like some of those bards. Your mother, sharp-witted and tireless, runs the household with an efficiency that would make a modern-day CEO weep with envy. You learn to churn butter, smoke fish, cure meat, and mend torn tunics. These are the skills that define your childhood, not axe-throwing contests or tales of Valhalla. In fact, one mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the vast majority of Vikings were farmers, their lives revolving around agriculture and animal husbandry, not constant raiding. They were very much tied to the land. The closest thing you've seen to a grand adventure is the annual journey to the local market, a journey that involves a grumpy ox and a cart full of wool and cheese. The excitement comes from seeing a new face, perhaps a trader from another fjord, and hearing snippets of news from beyond your valley. You'd think the kids would be out practicing their swordplay, but mostly you're trying to perfect your knot tying for fishing nets, or figuring out how to stop the chickens from escaping the coop. Historians still argue whether the concept of a dedicated warrior class was as prevalent as sagas suggest, or if most men simply picked up a weapon when needed, returning to their farms afterward. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? A Viking who was more concerned with crop rotation than battle formations. Your days are long, dictated by the sun and the seasons. The winters are harsh, filled with endless indoor tasks like carving utensils and repairing tools. You spend hours, probably too many hours, whittling small wooden animals, dreaming of what lies beyond the horizon. It's not dreams of glory, though It's more like a subtle yearning for something less muddy. Maybe a place where the sheep don't look at you with such judgmental eyes. A quirky tidbit: some scholars believe that the detailed carvings found on everyday Viking tools and household items were not just decorative, but also served as a way to pass the long, dark winter hours, a sort of artistic therapy. So, your whittling isn't just procrastination, it's cultural enrichment. You hear stories, of course, of distant lands and strange peoples. Merchants occasionally pass through, their tales filled with exotic goods and bustling ports. They speak of silver and silks, of amber and spices, and a small, quiet seed begins to sprout in your mind. It's not the desire to conquer these places, but to trade with them, to see what they have that you can get, and what you have that they might want. The idea of sailing, not to raid, but to exchange goods, seems surprisingly appealing. It's a pragmatic adventure, a way to better your family's lot, perhaps even escape the perpetual smell of manure. You start to listen more intently to the merchants, soaking in their descriptions of markets and sea routes, imagining a life where your hands might hold something other than a plow handle or a milking pail. The day finally comes when you convince your father that this trading idea isn't just a pipe dream born from too many long winter nights. He's a practical man, and the promise of a few extra silver rings for the family coffers eventually sways him. You're not going off on some grand, epic voyage to lands unknown. Your first journey is to a familiar, albeit larger, trading hub. A few days' sail along the coast. It's hardly the stuff of sagas, more like a slightly extended trip to the regional mall. If your mall was perpetually damp and smelled faintly of fish and wood smoke, your vessel, not a sleek, dragon-proud longship designed for swift raids, but a sturdy, unassuming Nara cargo ship, broad-bellied and built for capacity, not speed. Think of it as the workhorse of the Viking age, the reliable pickup truck to the longship's sports car. You're not a warrior. You're a maritime truck driver. You pack your modest share of goods, some neatly bundled wool your mother spun, a few well-carved wooden bowls you painstakingly whittled, and a small, precious quantity of cured fish. These are the fruits of your labor, the tangible result of countless hours of mundane chores. There's no plundered gold, no exotic silks, just honest, handcrafted items. You feel a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. This is it, your first venture into the wider world, a world that, so far, has mostly consisted of your immediate valley and the occasional grumpy neighbor. You wave goodbye to your family, who offer a mix of hopeful smiles and worried glances. Your father claps you on the shoulder, a gruff encouragement that speaks volumes. The crew is equally unassuming. A few other young men like yourself, looking to make a bit of coin, and an older, grizzled captain named Bjorn. Bjorn isn't a chieftain or a legendary warrior. He's a pragmatic man with a weather-beaten face and an encyclopedic knowledge of currents and coastal landmarks. His tales aren't of glorious battles, but of close calls with storms, tricky shoals, and surprisingly good catches of cod. He's the kind of man who measures success in bundles of pelts and barrels of ale, not heaps of treasure. And honestly, that suits you just fine. You're here to learn the trade, not to seek glory. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the vast majority of Viking voyages, especially in later periods, were for trade and exploration rather than just raiding. The Nair was their unsung hero, quietly connecting distant markets. The journey itself is less epic adventure and more extended bus ride. The waves are choppy, the wind is persistent, and the spray is relentless. You spend your days learning to read the sky for weather signs, helping to trim the sail, and probably trying to avoid getting seasick. You learn to brace yourself against the constant pitching and rolling, and how to find a relatively dry spot to sleep in the cramped hold. The days blur into a monotonous rhythm of creaking wood, slapping waves, and the occasional shouted instruction from Bjorn. There's no dramatic sea monster encounter, no desperate struggle against overwhelming odds, just the relentless, gray expanse of the ocean. You hear stories from the other crewmen, mostly about previous trips, about the annoyances of particular merchants, or the best places to find good ale at the trading post. One of them, a wiry fellow named Leaf, tells you about a time he saw a walrus from afar, mistaking it for a sea serpent. He laughs, a dry, raspy sound, and explains how disappointed he was when it turned out to just be a very large, blubbery animal. It's a quirky tidbit that sticks with you. Even the adventures are often just misunderstandings. Historians still argue whether the practical skills of seamanship and navigation were taught formally or simply passed down through generations of experience on these mundane trading voyages. You lean towards the latter, judging by Bjorn's casual instructions. As the days turn into nights, and then back into days, you begin to appreciate the quiet competence of the crew. They're not heroes, but they're good at what they do. They know how to mend a torn sail with astonishing speed, how to spot a distant landmark through the mist, and how to keep morale up with a well-timed, if somewhat crude, joke. You learn that the true adventure lies not in conquering, but in enduring. It's about facing the elements, overcoming small challenges, and slowly, surely, making your way to your destination. The excitement isn't about the thrill of the fight, but the anticipation of a successful trade, of coming home with more than you left with, and for a young man from a small farm, that feels like a victory in itself. As the Nair plows steadily through the waves, you start to truly understand the nuts and bolts of your new profession. Forget the romantic notion of raiding for gold and jewels. Your cargo holds a different kind of treasure. You're not dealing in stolen chalices or intricate brooches. Instead, your ship is laden with the bedrock of everyday life in the Viking Age. Think practical. Think essential. Think decidedly unglamorous. Your main export, for instance, is often walrus ivory, not for its aesthetic beauty necessarily, but because it's incredibly durable and carves well for tools, combs, and gaming pieces. A modern aside, imagine if your entire career revolved around shipping. Well, let's say high-quality plastic, less thrilling, perhaps, but vital for everyone's existence. Then there's pelts, furs of fox, squirrel, marten, and bear. These aren't just for looking fancy. They're for warmth, for bedding, for clothing in a land where winters bite with a vengeance. You learn to assess their quality by touch, to sniff for proper curing, and to spot a patched-up tear from 100 paces. It's an acquired skill, like being able to tell a good vintage wine from a swill, only with a lot more animal scent involved. You also carry honey and wax, both highly sought after, But perhaps the most surprising, and certainly the most pungent, cargo is fish, dried fish, salted fish, stockfish so hard it could double as a club. This is the protein staple of many northern communities, easily preserved and transported. You learn to appreciate the efficiency of it, even if the smell permeates every fiber of your clothing, and sometimes you suspect your very soul. You quickly realize that trading is less about high adventure and more about logistical puzzles, how to pack the most profitable goods into a finite space, how to keep them from spoiling, and how to get them to a place where people actually need them. This is a mainstream historical fact that often gets overshadowed. The vast majority of Viking trade was in bulky, practical goods, essential for daily life. Your roots, too, are far from mysterious, uncharted waters. Bjorn, the captain, relies on well-established sea lanes. These aren't daring voyages into the unknown, but rather predictable runs along coastlines, following known currents and aiming for familiar estuaries and river mouths. You stick to the coast as much as possible, using landmarks, a distinctive cliff, a certain cluster of islands, a noticeable bend in the river as your navigational aids. Think of it as following a well-worn highway, only the highway occasionally tries to drown you. You're not exploring, you're commuting. Historians still argue whether early Viking navigators used more sophisticated tools than dead reckoning and coastal piloting, but for traders like you, visible landmarks were often all you needed. A quirky tidbit you pick up from Bjorn. Some experienced traders could identify land not just by sight, but by the smell of the air, the color of the water, or even the type of birds that flew overhead. It's a deep, intuitive knowledge born from countless hours on the waves, a connection to the environment that feels almost supernatural, yet is entirely practical. Bjorn once described how he could tell he was nearing a certain fishing village just by the faint scent of drying cod in the air, miles before any land was visible. It makes you wonder what kind of specific smell you'll be able to identify in a few years. Probably something equally unappetizing. As you sail, you pass other ships, mostly other nairs, going about their own business. There's a nod, sometimes, a shouted greeting, but no dramatic high seas, chases, or battles. Everyone is just trying to get their goods to market, hoping for a decent profit. The sea isn't a battleground for you, it's a thoroughfare. And the true danger isn't a rival longship, but a sudden squall, a hidden sandbar, or the ever-present risk of your precious cargo getting waterlogged. Your focus is entirely on the practicalities, keeping the ship sound, the cargo dry, and your stomach full of whatever bland, hardtack-like sustenance Bjorn provides. It's a far cry from the glorious tales, but it's real. And it's how the economy of your world actually functions. Life aboard the Nair quickly settles into a monotonous rhythm, a far cry from the stirring images of daring raids and windswept glory. This isn't a longship, sleek and open to the elements, allowing for dramatic poses against a stormy sky. No, this is a working vessel, and your personal space is roughly equivalent to a slightly damp broom closet. You're typically crammed into the hold with the cargo, or huddled on deck under a makeshift shelter, always at the mercy of the elements. The air is a constant, unholy blend of salt spray, stale fish, and the pervasive, earthy scent of damp wool and unwashed bodies. You quickly learn that personal hygiene is a luxury, not a given. Forget your scented soaps. Your best bet for a bath is a bracing splash of cold seawater, which usually just makes you feel colder and saltier. Sleeping is an exercise in creative contortion. You find a spot, any spot, that offers a modicum of shelter from the wind and waves, and curl up. There are no hammocks here, no private cabins. You share your cramped quarters with your fellow crewmen. Their snores and shifting bodies forming a nightly symphony of discomfort. You become intimately familiar with the sounds of the ship, the endless creak and groan of the timbers, the slap of water against the hull, the insistent whistle of the wind through the rigging. These aren't the sounds of adventure. They're the sounds of a very slow, very wet journey. Think of it as an extended camping trip where everyone forgot their tents and deodorant. The food, predictably, is basic and designed for sustenance, not pleasure. Dried fish, hardtack, a kind of unleavened bread or biscuit that could probably shatter teeth, and perhaps some cured meat or cheese if you're lucky. Water stored in wooden barrels often tastes faintly of the wood itself, or worse, of whatever was stored in the barrel before. You learn to appreciate small luxuries, like a particularly well-preserved piece of dried apple, or the occasional swig of weak ale when Bjorn deems it appropriate. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is the severe limitations of diet. On long sea voyages during this period, leading to widespread issues like scurvy, even for traders, the boredom is a quiet adversary, almost more insidious than any storm. There are no books, no games, beyond a few worn dice or a simple board game carved into a spare piece of wood. Conversation tends to revolve around the weather, the cargo, or endless retellings of past journeys. You learn to stare at the horizon for hours, watching the clouds, counting passing birds, or simply letting your mind drift. You become intimately familiar with the patterns of the waves, the way the light changes on the water, the subtle shifts in the wind. This intense observation of nature is a quirky tidbit of Viking life, born of necessity, but perhaps fostering a deep, almost meditative connection to the environment. It's certainly more meditative than your typical Netflix binge. Despite the discomfort, a strange kind of camaraderie develops among the crew. You're all in the same leaky, creaking boat, literally. You help each other bail water, haul ropes, and offer a shared grimace when Bjorn tells another one of his endlessly repetitive jokes about a goat and a chieftain. There's a quiet understanding, a mutual reliance that transcends words. These are the men who will help you in a storm, who will share their last scrap of food if you need it. Historians still argue whether the close quarters and shared hardships of Viking long-distance travel fostered a unique sense of egalitarianism among crew members, especially on trading vessels, where hierarchy might have been less rigid than on raiding ships. Your hands, once rough from farm work, now develop a new set of calluses from handling wet ropes and cold wood. Your skin is perpetually chapped by the wind and sun. This is the reality of life at sea for a Viking trader, a grueling, often uncomfortable existence driven by the simple desire to make a living. It's less about glory and more about grit, less about adventure and more about endurance. And with each passing day, you realize that the real heroes aren't necessarily those who wield the biggest axe, but those who can stomach another meal of dried fish and still look forward to making a profit. Finally, after what feels like an eternity of endless gray waves and the persistent stench of fish, land appears on the horizon. Not the familiar, rugged coastline of your home, but a new, bustling silhouette of timber buildings and distant smoke. This is your destination, a major trading post, perhaps Hidabi, Dorestad, or Burka, depending on the captain's route. These weren't glittering metropolises, mind you, but more like glorified market towns. The anticipation, however, is palpable. This is where the real work, and hopefully the real profit, begins. As the Nair draws closer, the cacophony of the port washes over you. The guttural cries of merchants hawking their wares in a bewildering array of languages. 1,000 new smells, wood smoke, roasting meat, exotic spices you can't quite identify, the temps of iron. You're trying to take it all in, but mostly you're just trying to avoid tripping over ropes or getting a bucket of slop dumped on your head. Docking is a choreographed chaos. Bjorn, with practiced ease, guides the Nair into a designated spot. You and the other crew members spring into action, securing lines, lowering sails, and preparing the gangplank. This isn't a moment for contemplation. It's a moment for efficient labor. As soon as the gangplank is down, a swarm of people descends, eager porters looking for work, curious onlookers, and, most importantly, other merchants sizing up your ship and its potential cargo. This swift, almost overwhelming reception is a mainstream historical fact of these trading centers. Efficiency was key to maximizing profit during the short window a ship was in port. Stepping onto solid ground feels strangely unsettling after weeks of constant motion. The ground still seems to sway beneath your feet for a few moments, a phantom sensation that takes time to dissipate. The trading post itself is a maze of temporary stalls and permanent workshops, all crammed together. There are rows of leather, goods, piles of amber, glinting metalwork, and even more dried fish. You spot traders from distant lands, Frisians, Slavs, perhaps even a glimpse of someone from the Byzantine Empire, their clothing and languages strikingly different. It's a dizzying array of humanity, all focused on one thing, commerce. You learn quickly that navigating these markets requires a specific kind of awareness. Bjorn, ever the pragmatist, advises you to ignore the flashier displays and focus on the practicalities. The loudest merchant rarely has the best goods, lad, he grumbles. A classic, quirky tidbit of trading wisdom that still rings true today. He points out how some traders use subtle hand signals or pre-arranged calls to indicate prices or stock to their associates, a kind of ancient insider trading. Historians still argue whether the level of sophistication in these early medieval markets indicates a truly capitalist mindset or a more communal, reputation-based system. As you begin to unload your cargo, piece by painstaking piece, you start to feel the hum of the marketplace, a vibrant energy fueled by supply and demand. You're not just a farmer's son anymore. You're a cog in a much larger, global economic machine. And while it's still far from the heroic tales of your youth, there's a quiet satisfaction in contributing to this complex, bustling network. You're helping connect disparate parts of the world, one bundle of wool and one stack of dried fish at a time. The air might be thick with the smell of refuse, and the crowds might be overwhelming, But this is the beating heart of your world, and for the first time, you feel truly part of it. Now comes the real test of your newfound skills, the dance of negotiation. You stand amidst the bustling market, your pile of goods, the carefully spun wool, the whittled bowls, the surprisingly potent dried fish laid out before you. There's no fixed price list here, no universal currency exchange rate pinned to a board. Every transaction is a fresh contest of wills, a subtle battle of wits where both parties try to squeeze the most value from the other. It's less like a modern transaction and more like a high-stakes poker game, where your poker face is your ability to look nonchalant while desperately trying to remember. If Bjorn said this particular type of walrus ivory was worth 2 silver, arm rings, or 3, your first attempts are, frankly, a bit clumsy. You blurt out a price, too eager, and watch as the potential buyer, a portly man with shrewd eyes, simply grunts and walks away. Bjorn, observing from a distance, shakes his head, imperceptibly. He'd taught you the basics. Start high, but not so high that you scare them off. Listen more than you speak, and always, always be prepared to walk away. It's a delicate balance, like trying to herd a particularly stubborn goat through a narrow doorway. You learn to read the subtle cues, a flicker in the eye, a slight hesitation, a hand unconsciously reaching for a pouch. These are the tells, the tiny chinks in a merchant's armor. You try again with a woman examining your wool. She offers a meager amount of copper. You feign disinterest, sighing dramatically, as if her offer is an insult to your ancestors. She counters, slightly higher. You shake your head, patiently explaining the superior quality of your sheep's grazing land, the meticulous care taken. In the spinning, it's a performance, really, a bit of theater. You don't explicitly lie, but you certainly embellish. A mainstream historical fact is that personal reputation and trust played a significant role in Viking Age trade. A merchant known for being fair, even while haggling hard, would attract more business in the long run. The haggling can go on for what feels like an eternity over a single piece of amber or a bundle of pelts. There are dramatic sighs, exaggerated eye rolls, and even polite insults exchanged. It's all part of the game. You learn phrases in other languages, simple numbers, too much, too little. What do you offer? Guttural sounds that feel strange on your tongue but are essential for basic communication. Sometimes, if a deal is particularly difficult, you might suggest a part exchange, offering a smaller item to sweeten the deal. Imagine trying to buy a car by offering a mix of cash, your grandmother's antique teapot, and 3 chickens. It's chaotic, but it works. A quirky tidbit you notice is how some merchants use specific hand gestures or even certain vocal inflections to denote their steadfastness or willingness to concede. It's like a secret language, only understood by those immersed in the daily grind of the marketplace. Bjorn explains that some gestures can even signify curses or blessings, adding another layer of complexity to the negotiation beyond just the numbers. Historians still argue whether these intricate, nonverbal communication systems were universal across trading networks or highly localized, adapting to specific communities. You just try to mimic the successful ones, hoping you don't accidentally insult someone's mother. The satisfaction when you finally close a deal, when both parties agree on a price, is immense. It's not the thrill of battle, but a quieter, more profound victory. You've outmaneuvered, persuaded, and ultimately profited. You exchange your wool for some much-desired silver arm rings, or perhaps some finely crafted tools. The physical exchange is often accompanied by a firm handshake, a nod of respect, and perhaps even a shared, weary smile. You've navigated the treacherous waters of commerce, and you're still afloat. And as you count your meager but hard-won profits, you realize that this quiet triumph of trade feels surprisingly good. With the haggling done, your hands now hold the tangible results of your efforts. But what exactly are you holding? In the Viking Age, currency wasn't as straightforward as a handful of standardized coins. It was a fascinating, often bewildering array of objects, all carrying a specific, if sometimes fluid, value. You might receive silver in various forms: rings, bracelets, ingots, or even hacksilver pieces cut from larger objects. This was the closest thing to a universal currency, valued for its weight and purity. You learned to bite the silver, to test its authenticity, a surprisingly common and effective method for gauging its softness and thus its likely purity. Think of it as a low-tech but highly personal currency detector. But it doesn't stop there. You might also be paid in amber, highly prized for jewelry and decorative items, or walrus ivory, not just for its usefulness, but its exotic appeal in places where walruses were a distant myth. Sometimes you'd receive fine textiles, like silk or linen, themselves valuable trade goods that could be exchanged further down the line. Even mundane items, like cornstones for grinding grain, or high-quality tools, could serve as payment if they were scarce in your home region. It's a system where every object has the potential to be currency, depending on the demand. This flexible approach to value is a mainstream historical fact, showcasing a more complex economic system than often imagined. The value of these goods wasn't always fixed. It fluctuated based on supply and demand, the season, and even the reputation of the merchant selling or buying. A particularly harsh winter might drive up the price of pelts. A successful voyage bringing in a large amount of a certain commodity could depress its value. You learn to assess the market, to listen to whispers of recent arrivals or impending shortages. Bjorn tells you stories of times when a single well-made comb could fetch a significant price simply because no one else had any. It's less like a modern stock market and more like a never-ending yard sale, where the prices are constantly shifting. One particularly quirky tidbit you observe is the use of slave tokens in some transactions. While slavery was a grim reality of the era, the currency wasn't the person themselves, but often a small, distinct token representing a person, which could then be redeemed. It's a stark reminder of the harshness of the times and how human lives could be commodified. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these diverse currencies hindered or helped the expansion of Viking trade networks. Was it a sign of ingenuity, adapting to local conditions, or a barrier to more widespread, standardized commerce? You just know it keeps you on your toes. Sometimes payment isn't in physical goods at all, but in credit or favors. A merchant might agree to pay you on your next visit, or offer you a prime spot at the market for your next cargo. These informal agreements rely entirely on trust and reputation. If you prove yourself to be an honest and reliable trader, doors open. If you cheat or renege on a deal, word travels fast, and your business opportunities shrink faster than a piece of wool in a hot wash. It's a testament to the power of a good name in a world without formal contracts or legal recourse. As you count your newly acquired silver rings and feel the smooth texture of an amber bead, you begin to understand the true wealth of a Viking trader. It's not about hoarding a single type of treasure, but about accumulating a diverse portfolio of goods that can be exchanged, sold, or used to acquire even more valuable items. You're not just a farmer. You're a rudimentary economist, constantly evaluating supply, demand, and the ever-shifting concept of value. And honestly, it's a lot more mentally taxing than herding sheep, but infinitely more rewarding when you realize you just traded a few dozen dried fish for a piece of silk that will make your mother gasp with delight. Life as a Viking trader, you quickly discover, isn't all about shrewd deals and the clinking of silver. The journey, and even the time spent in bustling ports, comes with its own set of mundane dangers and frustrating annoyances. Forget the glory of battle. You're more likely to be taken down by a bout of dysentery than a warrior's axe. The food, though often hearty, is prepared in conditions that would make a modern health inspector faint. Stale water, questionable meat, and the constant presence of vermin mean that a churning stomach is a far more common companion than a trusty shield. You learn to grimace and bear it, developing an iron gut and a deep appreciation for even a relatively clean puddle. Then there's the weather. While the sagas might speak of mighty storms as tests of courage, for you, a sudden squall is just a monumental pain. It means frantically bailing water, wrestling with sodden sails, and trying to keep your precious cargo from getting soaked and ruined. A persistent headwind can add days, even weeks. You learn to scan the sky with a practiced eye, reading the subtle shifts in clouds, the way the wind whispers through the rigging. A mainstream historical fact is that Viking seafaring was heavily reliant on favorable winds and weather, and unexpected changes could be disastrous for trade ships, leading to delays or even shipwrecks. The ports themselves, while exciting, bring their own set of headaches. Crowds are an invitation for pickpockets and petty thieves. You learn to keep your hand on your purse, to eye strangers with suspicion, and to avoid dark alleys after sundown. Merchants, while mostly honest, can be surprisingly devious. Bjorn warns you of tricks, goods hidden at the bottom of a barrel, false weights, or even carefully crafted counterfeits. You develop a keen eye for detail, scrutinizing every piece of silver, every amber bead, every pelt. It's less about a grand adventure and more about being constantly vigilant, like a squirrel protecting its winter stash from other squirrels. Another annoyance is the constant negotiation with local authorities, if they exist at all. Sometimes there's a chieftain or a jarl who demands a toll for safe passage or for the right to trade in their territory. These can be reasonable fees or exorbitant demands, depending on the ruler's mood and the perceived value of your cargo. You learn the art of polite deference, of offering small gifts, and of knowing when to stand firm and when to concede. It's a delicate dance, a bit like navigating bureaucracy, only with significantly sharper axes involved. Historians still argue whether these tolls were primarily for protection or simply a form of organized banditry by locals. You suspect a bit of both. A quirky tidbit you pick up is how some shrewd traders would strategically lose a small, seemingly insignificant item during their initial visit to a new market, only to return later and find it, thus gaining an excuse to re-engage with various merchants and discreetly gather information about prices and demand. It's a subtle form of espionage, a way to gain an edge without overtly asking questions. Bjorn chuckles when he tells you this, admitting he's used it more than once. It's a low-key tactic in a world without market research reports. And then there's the sheer weariness, the long hours, the physical exertion of loading and unloading, the mental strain of constant negotiation, and the persistent discomfort of travel. It all adds up. You're often bone-tired, stiff, and covered in grime. You dream of a warm bed, a home-cooked meal, and a few days without the rocking of a ship or the clamor of a market. These are the unsung struggles of the Viking trader, the exhaustion, the discomfort, the endless minor frustrations. They might not make for thrilling sagas, but they are the bedrock of your reality, proving that the toughest challenges aren't always found on the battlefield, but often just getting through the day. With the autumn winds beginning to bite and the threat of severe winter storms looming, you realize that your trading season is drawing to a close. Most distant voyages become too perilous, and the bustling markets thin out as merchants head home. This transition marks the beginning of the winter layover, a period that, for a Viking trader, is less about leisurely relaxation and more about essential maintenance, meticulous accounting, and perhaps a touch of soul-crushing boredom. You're not sailing off to sunnier climes. You're hunkering down, usually back in your home territory or a pre-arranged wintering spot. The first order of business is your ship, the trusty Nair. She's seen you through choppy seas and countless miles, and now she needs attention. And the crew haul her ashore, carefully inspecting every plank, every rivet. There are repairs to be made, seams to caulk, timbers to replace, rigging to mend. This is painstaking, often freezing work, with numb fingers and aching backs. You learn to wield a chisel and a hammer with surprising dexterity, patching up the wear and tear of the trading season. It's a bit like pulling your car apart in the dead of winter to fix a suspicious knocking sound. Only your car is made of wood and floats on water, and your garage is an open beach. This essential winter maintenance is a mainstream historical fact, crucial for ensuring the seaworthiness of vessels for the next trading season. Once the ship is cared for, your attention turns to your goods and your profits. This is the time for the meticulous, if rudimentary, accounting. You spread out your newly acquired silver rings, the amber beads, the fine textiles. You weigh them, count them, and perhaps, for the first time, allow yourself a small, satisfied smile at the tangible accumulation of your efforts. You compare what you brought from home to what you've brought back, calculating your gains. It's a process of mental arithmetic, of tallying in your head, or perhaps scratching marks on a piece of wood. Bjorn, for his part, uses an abacus of sorts, small pebbles on a marked board, to keep track of his larger transactions. You also spend time evaluating your remaining stock. What didn't sell? What sold well? What will be in demand next season? You start planning for the next trading cycle, even though the spring is still many moons away. This forward-thinking approach, planning routes and anticipating demand, shows a surprisingly modern business acumen. It's a quirky tidbit that Viking traders, despite their lack of formal education, were often shrewd economists, driven by the practicalities of making a profit. Historians still argue whether the concept of long-term economic planning beyond immediate needs was truly developed in Viking societies or emerged more opportunistically. The long, dark winter days are filled with these preparations, but also with the inescapable reality of idleness. There are fewer people around, less bustle. The vibrant chaos of the market is replaced by the quiet hum of your own thoughts. You spend hours mending your own clothes, sharpening your tools, perhaps even helping your family with their farm chores, returning to the very life you sought to escape. You'll listen to sagas told around the fire, but now you hear them with a different ear, recognizing the embellishments, the exaggerations. You've seen the reality of the wider world, and it's far more practical and less dramatic than the bards suggest. Sometimes you'll visit local craftsmen, commission new items, or arrange for repairs. You might trade some of your silver for a axe head or a new set of tools. It's a quieter form of commerce, a steady exchange within the local community. The social interactions are more familiar, less guarded than in the foreign markets. You're back among your own people, and there's a comfort in that. But there's also a restlessness. The winter layover is a period of necessary hibernation. But you know that with the melting snows and the first hints of spring, the call of the open sea and the promise of new markets will soon beckon once more. And you, the surprisingly mundane Viking trader, will be ready to answer. The winter layover isn't just about mending ships and counting silver. It's also when you fully reintegrate into the fabric of your home community. You're not just a solitary adventurer, but a vital thread in the social tapestry. Back on the farm, you help your family prepare for the harsh months ahead. You assist with butchering, preserving meat and fish, and ensuring the livestock are well sheltered. Your calloused hands, so adept at handling ropes and goods, now deftly mend fences and chop firewood. It's a return to the rhythms of your youth, a grounding in the very earth that sustains your people. Your unique position as a trader, however, gives you a different status within the community. You're a connection to the outside world, a bringer of news, and sometimes a source of goods not readily available locally. Neighbors drop by, eager for stories of distant lands, not tales of raids, but of the bustling markets, the strange customs, and the exotic goods you've seen. You'll describe the different types of people you've met, the bewildering array of languages, and the surprising ways people conduct business. You might even trade some of your acquired goods directly within the village, bypassing the larger markets. Perhaps that fine linen you brought back finds a home with a local weaver, or a small piece of amber becomes a cherished ornament for a neighbor's daughter. This informal local trade is a mainstream historical fact, often supplementing the larger long-distance voyages and strengthening community ties. Your knowledge of the wider world also means you're often consulted on matters that touch upon external affairs. Perhaps a dispute arises over a trade agreement with a neighboring settlement, or a question about a particular type of foreign goods. Your experiences, born from the mundane grind of the market, suddenly become valuable. You might be asked to mediate, to interpret, or to simply offer your informed opinion. You're no chieftain, but your practical wisdom gained from travel carries weight. It's a subtle form of influence, far removed from the overt power of a warrior, but effective nonetheless. You also spend time with other traders who have returned for the winter. You share tales of good deals and bad, of treacherous storms and unreliable merchants. These gatherings, often over shared ale in a smoky hall, are a vital exchange of information. You learn about new routes, potential dangers, and the ever-shifting prices of various commodities. It's a bit like a medieval business conference, only with less PowerPoint and more rough-and-tumble storytelling. A quirky tidbit: some traders would even share coded songs or riddles containing veiled information about market conditions or hidden dangers along a route, ensuring the knowledge was passed only to those who understood the language. Historians still argue whether the social status of a successful Viking trader eventually rivaled that of a warrior or landowner. While sagas emphasize martial prowess, the economic power and international connections of traders were undeniable. You, certainly, feel a sense of quiet pride in your profession. You're not celebrated for bloodshed, but for your ability to provide for your family and community, to bring in resources that enrich everyone's lives. Your contributions are tangible: the silver that strengthens the family's wealth, the tools that make farm work easier, the occasional luxury item that brightens a bleak winter day. As the winter wears on, and the long nights eventually begin to shorten, a new sense of anticipation stirs. The comforts of home are welcome, but the call of the open sea, the challenge of the next market, begins to whisper in your ear. You've mended the ship, balanced the books, and reconnected with your roots. You're ready, not for glory, but for another season of honest, hard-working trade. You're not a hero of legend, but you are a cornerstone of your society, a quiet engine driving its prosperity. And that, in its own way, is a victory. As the last vestiges of winter snow reluctantly melt and the first green shoots tentatively emerge, the familiar stir of anticipation begins to hum within you. The long layover, filled with chores and quiet reflection, gives way to the irresistible pull of the open sea. Your homecoming, initially a welcome respite from the ceaseless motion of the ship, now feels like a temporary pause. The routine of farm life, while comforting, is no longer enough. You're a trader, and your true rhythm is dictated by the ebb and flow of tides and markets, not the cycles of planting and harvest. The return to your home settlement always involves a subtle readjustment. You've brought back foreign goods, stories of distant lands, and perhaps a slightly wider perspective on the world. Your family welcomes you with warmth, eager for your tales, and, let's be honest, for the practical goods you've acquired. Your mother might delight in a new piece of linen. Your father might inspect a foreign-made tool with a critical but appreciative eye. These small exchanges, the tangible benefits of your voyages, solidify your role as the family's link to the wider economy. It's a quiet vindication of all those uncomfortable days at sea and endless hours of haggling. Yet, there's a bittersweet quality to these returns. You're home, but a part of you remains connected to the distant shores. You've seen other ways of life, other landscapes, and while your home fjord is beautiful, it no longer feels like the entirety of your world. You find yourself noticing the small details of your village with a renewed, almost detached perspective. The unchanging gossip, the familiar faces, the predictable daily routines. It's comfortable, but sometimes a little stifling. A mainstream historical fact is that returning traders and seafarers often brought back not just goods, but also new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences that subtly reshaped their home. Communities, the social gatherings, initially a chance to share your experiences, slowly morph into a re-entry into the local dynamics. You listen to the familiar concerns of your neighbors, the state of their crops, the health of their livestock, the petty squabbles over land boundaries. You nod, offer advice where you can, and try to re-immerse yourself, but you carry the scent of distant markets, the echoes of foreign tongues, and the memory of bustling crowds. You're different, subtly changed by your journeys, even if no one else explicitly notices. It's like returning from a long backpacking trip and trying to explain the world to someone who's never left their hometown. You can try, but some things just have to be experienced. You also fall back into the habit of preparing for the next season. The silver and other valuable goods you brought back need to be secured, perhaps melted down and reformed into arm rings or ingots for easier transport or storage. You assess the family's needs and the local resources. What can your farm produce that will fetch a good price in the distant markets? What local crafts are in high demand elsewhere? This quiet, strategic planning is part of your homecoming. Routine, a practical bridge between your life as a farmer and your life as a merchant. Historians still argue whether the wealth generated by long-distance trade significantly altered the social stratification within Viking communities, or if traditional hierarchies remained largely intact. You just know a little extra silver never hurt anyone's standing. A quirky tidbit you often observe is how the local children, especially the younger boys, look at you with wide, curious eyes. They've heard the stories, perhaps even the exaggerated ones, and they see you as a figure of adventure. They might ask about sea monsters or fierce battles, questions that make you smile wryly. You tell them about the smell of foreign spices or the strange sounds of a distant city, hoping to plant a seed of practical curiosity rather than unrealistic dreams of glory. You wouldn't discourage them, but you definitely wouldn't sugarcoat the reality of seasickness or monotonous days. After all, the mundane life of a trader is still a life lived, and it's your life, a life that, despite its lack of dramatic flair, provides for your family and connects your small world to the larger one beyond the horizon. The passing of seasons marks not just the rhythm of trade, but the steady march of time, and with it, the progression of your own life. Now, as you mature, the focus shifts subtly, but inevitably, to the next generation. You've brought your son, or perhaps a younger nephew, along on a few of the shorter, less perilous voyages. He's learning the ropes, much like you did, and experiencing the surprisingly unglamorous reality of life aboard a Nair. You watch him struggle with seasickness, flinch at the smell of stockfish, and try to make sense of the chaotic bustle of a foreign market. It's a mix of nostalgia and exasperation as you recall your own awkward first steps in this life. You patiently teach him the critical skills, how to tie a proper knot that won't slip in a storm, how to read the clouds for impending weather, and most importantly, the nuanced art of negotiation. You show him how to assess the quality of wool, how to spot a genuine piece of amber, and how to maintain a stoic expression even when a merchant makes an outrageously low offer. Never show desperation. Son, you grumble, recalling Bjorn's own advice. This direct, hands-on apprenticeship is a mainstream historical fact. Knowledge and skills, especially in specialized trades like long-distance commerce, were typically passed down through families or close kin. Your lessons are less about grand, strategic planning and more about the daily grind. You emphasize the importance of reliability, of keeping your word, and of building a good reputation. A man's word is his bond in trade, you tell him, knowing that in a world without complex legal systems, trust is the most valuable currency. You also teach him the value of patience. Long voyages mean long stretches of boredom. Successful negotiations mean waiting for the right moment. He learns that the exciting stories of adventure are mostly confined to the Skald's sagas. The reality is far more about endurance and quiet persistence. You find yourself sharing quirky tidbits of wisdom you've accumulated over the years. You explain how the sound of certain seabirds can tell you how far you are from land, or how the pattern of waves can indicate hidden shoals. You might point out a particular type of knot used by a rival trading group, a tiny detail that only a seasoned merchant would recognize. You share stories of the most frustrating customers, the biggest windfalls, and the times you nearly lost your entire cargo to a rogue wave. These are the war stories of a Viking trader, filled with practical lessons rather than heroic feats. Historians still argue whether these informal apprenticeships were more effective for practical skill transfer than any formalized training could have been. You certainly believe in the school of hard knocks. Sometimes, literally, the process of teaching reinforces your own understanding of the trade. You articulate principles you'd only intuitively known, solidifying your own expertise. And as you watch your son slowly gain confidence, seeing him successfully haggle for a small parcel of goods or confidently direct a dockhand, there's a quiet pride. You're not just passing on a livelihood, you're passing on a way of life, one that has sustained your family for generations. It might not be the glorious legacy of a warrior, but it is a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and sustained effort. This continuation of the trading life from father to son is the true engine of prosperity for your family. It's not about sudden riches or fleeting glory, but about the steady accumulation of wealth, the slow improvement of your family's standing, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. You're ensuring that the mundane, yet vital, work of connecting distant lands and exchanging goods will continue, quietly weaving your family's thread into the vast, complex tapestry of the Viking world's economy. And as you watch your son develop his own calloused hands and a shrewd glint in his eye, you know that the unglamorous yet essential life of a Viking trader will endure. As the years accumulate, etched onto your face like the lines on an old chart, the relentless vigor of youth begins to wane. The heavy lifting becomes a task for younger backs, and the long, cold nights at sea bite with a sharper sting. You still embark on voyages, but perhaps fewer, and certainly less demanding ones. Your son, now a seasoned trader in his own right, takes on more of the responsibility, leaving you more time for reflection, for observing the world you've helped shape. The perspective of age brings a certain clarity. a quiet understanding of the life you've led. You sit by the hearth on a winter's night, listening to your son recount his latest journey. He tells of the same choppy seas, the same shrewd merchants, the same endless haggling. And you smile, a small, knowing smile, because it's the same mundane reality you've lived for decades. There were no dragons, no epic battles, no sagas sung about your daring feats. Your heroism lay in your persistence, your cunning in your ability to distinguish good wool from bad, your wealth measured in the steady accumulation of silver and the well-being of your family. It's a mainstream historical fact that for most Vikings, daily life was far more concerned with survival, sustenance, and commerce than with grand conquest. You think about the countless hours spent on the deck of your Nair, smelling of fish and tar, enduring the relentless pitch and roll. You recall the endless negotiations, the subtle dance of bluff and counterbluff, the quiet satisfaction of a deal well struck. These weren't the adventures of a warrior, but they were your adventures. You were the one who brought exotic amber to your village, who ensured your family had access to fine tools, who connected your remote fjord to the wider world. You were a bridge, a conduit, and that quiet purpose carries its own profound meaning. There's a sense of pride, too, in the small, tangible improvements your efforts have brought. Your family's farm is more prosperous, your children are well-fed and well-clothed, and your standing in the community is secure, built on reputation and steady contribution, not on fleeting glory. You've seen families rise and fall, not through battle prowess, but through diligent trade or ruinous deals. It's a quiet testament to the enduring power of commerce, the slow, steady hum of economic activity that underpins all the more dramatic sagas. Historians still argue whether the long-term impact of Viking trade was more significant for the development of European economies than their more famous raiding activities. You certainly have your opinion. A quirky tidbit that often brings a wry smile to your aged lips is the memory of the sheer number of mundane items you transported over the years. Not just furs and fish, but countless grinding stones, lumps of iron ore, bundles of ropes, and even mundane household utensils. You were effectively a long-distance delivery service for the necessities of life. You remember a particularly rough journey where your entire cargo consisted of nothing but a load of honest, unglamorous timber, yet the profit on it allowed you to buy a new plow for your farm. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across your familiar fields, you feel a deep, abiding contentment. Your legacy isn't written in a saga, but in the sturdy roof over your head, the healthy livestock in the barn, and the confident stride of your son as he prepares for his next voyage. You were a Viking, yes, but not the one of legends. You were a trader, a quiet force of connection and sustenance, and in that you find a peace that no battlefield glory could ever provide. Your life was surprisingly mundane, yes, but it was profoundly meaningful. Your reputation, built brick by brick with every honest deal and every successfully delivered cargo, is a different kind of armor than any warrior might wear. It's an intangible asset, but arguably more valuable in the long run than a sharp axe or a sturdy shield. In the bustling markets, where trust is often fleeting, your word becomes your bond. Merchants from distant lands, who initially regarded you with suspicion, now greet you with a nod of recognition, sometimes even a genuine smile. This gradual acceptance, this quiet respect, is a testament to years of consistent, reliable trading. You learn that a good reputation precedes you, smoothing the way for future transactions. When you arrive in a new port, a whispered recommendation from a familiar merchant can open doors that would otherwise remain shut. People are more willing to deal with you, perhaps even offer slightly better prices, knowing you won't try to cheat them or disappear with their goods. This network of trust, built on countless small interactions, is a mainstream historical fact of Viking Age commerce. It was a deeply personal economy, where relationships mattered as much as, if not more than, the goods themselves. Conversely, you've seen the swift and devastating impact of a bad reputation. A single dishonest deal, a broken promise, or a shoddy delivery can lead to a merchant being shunned, their business opportunities drying up faster than a puddle in summer. Word travels, not by raven or written decree, but by the relentless hum of gossip and the shared experiences of other traders. You learn to be wary of those with a dubious past, recognizing the subtle signs of untrustworthiness in their mannerisms, or the way others avoid their stalls. It's a harsh but effective system of accountability. Your standing within your own community also evolves. You're seen as a provider, a shrewd operator, someone who understands the wider world. While the warriors are celebrated in sagas for their conquests, you're quietly appreciated for your contributions to the community's wealth and access to goods. You might be asked to arbitrate disputes between local farmers and visiting merchants. Your impartiality and experience making you a trusted figure. It's a form of quiet authority, built on practical wisdom rather than inherited status. Historians still argue whether this rising importance of merchants began to challenge the traditional aristocratic power structures in some Viking societies. A quirky tidbit you often observe is how some particularly successful traders would deliberately cultivate an eccentric habit or a distinctive piece of clothing, making themselves memorable and reinforcing their personal brand. One merchant, you recall, always wore a hat adorned with the feathers of a rare bird, a subtle signal of his widespread travels and success. You, perhaps, develop a knack for a particularly dry joke, or a habit of always offering a small, unexpected gift to those you trade with regularly, solidifying your image as dependable, if a little predictable. This enduring reputation, woven from years of honest transactions and reliable deliveries, becomes a source of deep satisfaction in your later years. It's a different kind of fame than a warrior's, more subtle, less prone to dramatic highs and lows. It's the quiet hum of respect, the steady flow of business, the knowledge that your efforts have made a tangible difference. You might not be sung about in the longhouses, but your name is known and trusted in the markets. And for a Viking trader, that is reputation enough. As the twilight years descend, you look back on a life that, by the standards of epic sagas, might seem surprisingly unremarkable. No grand battles fought, no kingdoms conquered, no legendary treasures amassed through brute force. Yet your impact on the world, on your family, and on the connections between disparate peoples is undeniable. You are the unsung hero, the quiet force behind the scenes, the one who kept the wheels of commerce turning in an era often defined by more dramatic destructive acts. You remember the vastness of the sea, not as a field of glory, but as a highway. A highway that, despite its challenges, allowed you to bring much-needed salt to a community inland, or to trade for a piece of silver that bought your family a sturdier plow. You were part of a vast, intricate network, silently connecting remote farmsteads to bustling international markets, moving goods, and, perhaps more importantly, ideas. This practical, often overlooked role is a mainstream historical fact. Viking traders were crucial conduits of cultural and economic exchange, silently shaping the development of early medieval Europe. The mundane nature of your profession, the endless repetition of packing, sailing, haggling, and returning, forged a resilience within you that few warriors could claim. You faced down boredom, discomfort, and the constant threat of a ruined cargo. Your battles were with the elements, with your own patience, and with the shrewdness of other merchants. And you won, not with a sword, but with a keen eye, a quick mind, and an unwavering commitment to the trade. Historians still argue whether the lasting legacy of the Viking Age lies more in their sophisticated trading networks and urban centers like Hiddeby and Birka, or in their more famous raiding expeditions. You know in your bones that it's the former. The goods you carried, the roots you forged, the relationships you built. These were the threads that truly wove together the tapestry of the early medieval world. Your legacy isn't written in blood, but in the enduring flow of commerce, the subtle exchange of cultures, and the slow, steady hum of progress. You might not have a skald singing your praises, or a runestone commemorating your daring deeds. Your name won't echo through the sagas for generations, but your impact is real, tangible, woven into the very fabric of daily life. The silver in your daughter's necklace, the foreign tools in your neighbor's shed, the improved quality of the local wool, these are your monuments. Your life was a series of small, consistent victories, a testament to the power of perseverance and the quiet dignity of honest work. A quirky tidbit that brings a faint smile to your lips. You once traded a particularly stubborn goat for a surprisingly valuable piece of amber, a transaction that still makes you chuckle. It was a deal made in desperation, but it paid off handsomely, proving that sometimes the most mundane items can hold the greatest potential. As the final light of day fades from the window and the comforting scent of wood smoke fills your home, you settle back, feeling the familiar aches of a life well lived. You weren't a hero of myth, but you were something arguably more important, a survivor, a provider, and a vital, if unsung, architect of your world. The hum of the universe continues, and you, the surprisingly mundane Viking trader, have played your part, a quiet, essential note in the grand symphony of history. The embers in the hearth glow softly now, casting a warm, sleepy light across the room. The sounds of the night outside are gentle, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in a soft breeze. You feel the weariness in your bones, a comfortable weight after a long life filled with journeys and quiet triumphs. The stories of battles and glory fade, replaced by the calming rhythm of your own breath, the steady beat of your heart. Imagine the gentle rocking of the Nair, not a ship on a stormy sea, but a cradle easing you into a deep slumber. The scent of salt and pine, the distant murmur of voices from a bustling market, they soften, becoming whispers, then just a comforting, ambient hum. You've seen the world, not through the lens of a warrior's fury, but through the keen eyes of a merchant, understanding its true connections, its quiet, persistent flow. Let the images of those long journeys, the patient haggling, the sturdy ship, simply drift. They've done their work, shown you a different kind of Viking, a different kind of strength. Now, let your mind quiet. Feel the warmth of your blankets, the comfort of your bed. The world outside will continue its ceaseless turning, but for now, it's time for rest. Let the last thoughts be of calm waters, a gentle breeze, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived.